All right, you guys. So as we jump into the art here in the studio, we are going to be finishing up the last portions of the topper here. Now, in doing so, we're going to be rolling into the part where we're creating the flame effect. Now, we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, some backstory for this side video, apart from the main full build of this diorama project. This is a project of a reference photo that I had taken from the Christmas store in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Now, you can see that reference photo in the original full-length hour-long video of me crafting this awesome little Christmas candle. However, today what we're doing is we're going to be working to finalize kind of the wick as you see it right there, as well as we're going to add 2 magnets to hold the stained glass UV resin flame effect onto the diorama. Now, technically speaking, I really don't need these magnets because the LEDs do hold the UV resin stained glass effect into position. However, if I ever wanted to remove the stained glass flame effect and put a different color on it, then I could do so. So I have a lot of versatility with this. I can always change things up if I get tired of the same old stained glass effect. And I can just add new things to the project. I'm really not like tied down to it. And it doesn't really, I don't have to go out of my way to work extra hard in the project to create that stained glass effect where it's removable with the magnets. Now, in a separate tips and tricks video, apart from the main full-length hour-long content of me making this awesome Christmas candle diorama, I have produced a small tips and tricks on how to make the UV resin melted wax effect. So if you're interested in seeing just the melted wax UV resin layers, then that is also in its own singular small video there under the tips and tricks playlist here on my YouTube channel. Now, what I'm doing now is I'm going to go ahead and apply a saran wrap layer between my magnets and over the wick. And I'm being very specific to make sure that the area around the wick does have a little bit of an air gap there. So it's not really tight, so that if I wanted to remove it, I could. Remember, we're going to have all the wiring and the LEDs coming up out of that little straw that we had used. It's not actually a straw. It's actually a piece of a PVC, like a polymer plastic used for terrain building and dioramas. You can find that on the terrain building and also the RC car aisle of Hobby Lobby and stores like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix up a little bit of UV resin here with a base color. Now, the original one of these I made it a little bit too dark, okay? Yes, I did. So I end up coming back later and I redo this just with a little bit less blue. I used a little bit of a turquoise, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of sunshine yellow as well. And all of those inks are Tim Holtz inks, if you're wondering about that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a saran wrap, just getting kind of like a baggie or a bowl-like shape. And I'm going to go ahead and cure this in this general shape. And this is going to give us the base around the existing magnets that are already being held down to the magnets underneath our plastic. So we have our magnets on the actual melted UV resin base. Then we have the actual saran wrap. Then we have our other magnets. And then we're pouring epoxy around that. Now we might get a little bit of bleed over on the actual magnets while we're making this portion of the build, and that's completely okay as long as the magnets still hold pretty strong, and you can see it very snapping into place right there. Then it's doing its job, and it's going to hold strongly enough to stay on the project. Not worried at all about that. Now, as I struggle very much so to remove the saran wrap, now it does come off, but it sometimes just takes a little bit of elbow grease and a few tools, depending on how many nooks and crannies you have that plastic attached to, just to get all those little little pieces that are left over. Now, one thing that I found that was very beneficial here is I actually used a torch, a butane torch, and I actually just burned the plastic off the project completely. So I just literally hit it with the butane torch really quick, and it burns the plastic away. But depending on whether you want all that stinky plastic, a burnt smell in your studio or not, or something like that, then this is it. So this is the 2.0 that I created. I made it a little bit lighter on the blue, And I did go ahead and make sure that I had a little bit yellow near the wick, just so I can create a little bit more of a centralized kind of like a burning flame effect. Now, as we go in with our next layers here, we're going to be using the UV resin over saran wrap. Now, the saran wrap I have just laid into little nooks and crannies of a wrinkled up washcloth. And now I have two of these washcloths layered together just on top of each other to create just a nice little buffer up off my workstation. And then I'll just kind of create little pockets where I can pour the UV resin layers into. Now, you can shape these UV resin layers however you want to. You can make them in star shapes, you can make them in circular round shapes, but basically we're going to create a bunch of different misshapen layers that we're going to layer onto the actual item itself. We are going to be using a substantial amount of UV resin in the creation of this UV resin stained glass effect, and I really do like using UV resin to create stained glass like this. It's very enjoyable, and the end result is just very satisfying. Now, make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated area. No one wants to smell this stinky stuff on a consistent basis, so just make sure that your room is breathing quite well, and you can kind of get that nasty, smelly, stinky air out of the space if you can. When I was working with this, I actually had my window and my fan on, so I had the window open just so all that stinky air can be pushed out of the studio area. Using different colors here. Now, we're going to run through just a few layers of colors here, and you want to make sure that you create enough of these little stained glass effects so where you don't have to continuously come back and make more. And you can make these as thick as you like, but just remember that because you are tinting them with the inks, it does mean that you do have to give them a little bit extra attention with the UV light. Now, some of these, when I pull them up off the plastic, they are a little bit still wet. So when I lay them down on my silicone mat, liquid or wet side up, I will hit those again with a UV light, and then that will cure the other side of it. So some of these are fully cured, some of them are just a little bit wet. If you leave a little bit of wetness behind on the saran wrap, it's no big deal. In essence, actually leaving a little bit of that tacky UV resin on there because of its thickness and how long it takes to dry it, or cure it, it makes it easier to pull off the saran wrap. Sometimes when it's absolutely fully cured, it does become a pain to get it off the saran wrap. But this is just a fun project, and you can do it a lot of different ways. Again, I will usually hit this one time with my pretty powerful Igloo UV lamp, and I'll go ahead and then at that point let it cool off before I remove it. Because that UV resin, because of the thickness, does really warm up quite a bit. And you don't want to burn your fingers in any way or pick up something that's super hot and then you have to drop it down again. So give it time to cool off for a minute before you do pull that off of the plastic. We're going to now go in with a ultramarine blue here. Now this is actually more of a glacier. The color's called glacier, but it's really in all essence ultramarine blue. But look how great that looks. It's very see-through, and I only added probably about 1 to 2 drops of alcohol ink into this large container of UV resin. On average, I'm using maybe 20 milliliters, maybe 25 in each of these pours. And these are separate sessions of UV resin curing cycles. So as you can see, I am going to kind of like switch up the blue color a little bit. The first one was Glacier. I can't remember the color this one is. I believe it's Monsoon, but I only used 1 drop of resin for that round instead of 2 like I did with Glacier. It still actually comes out quite dark in overall consistency here, but look how great this looks. It's coming off of the plastic. I promise it is. But here, look how great this looks when I hold it up to the camera. Look how great that looks as far as how see-through it is. And that's where you really get that little kind of like stained glass effect. What you could really do is mix a lot of different colors into one full sheet, which I have done in the past. You can also use mica powder to layer on the back of these little UV resin stained glass effects, and it will give it a more opaque kind of like a flat look to it. So you have a lot of variations and a lot of ways you can create these. But I did try to shape these so they have a large taper at the bottom, and it kind of like wisps up towards the top. And that's going to give that kind of flame-like effect and coloring. Now we're going to go in with a pearl. As you can see here, I'm going to be very, very hesitant about the colors that I use in this. I wanted to introduce a little bit of maybe like a silverish slash white effect into the flame. And I just thought it would be very cool to introduce just a more bleached out color compared to the orange and the blues or yellows that I'm trying to introduce into the flame effect. I am going to make these substantially larger so that I can use these as the base of the build as we start to attach all of these flame pieces together. So in essence, I make about maybe one or two of these, and I think I make one more later on in the process. But so I do come back and make one extra. But as you can see, they're very thick there. But the color of the lighting as it kind of cascades through those pieces are going to be very satisfying. So here's the first part of this project here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pour a little bit of UV resin on the bottom of each of these white segments. And I'm going to use my smaller UV light to go ahead and adhere them together. We'll move on to the larger UV light later on in the process when I really want to get it cooking and get it kind of cured up. But for now, what we're doing is we're just building up the layers with these shards of UV resin that we had created with the saran wrap. Now, it's a little bit of a give and take, so you have to kind of get the feel for how it all is going to attach. And as you attach more pieces, it will become easier to work with. The first few are the hardest just because you're trying to get them to adhere to that bottom piece. As you can see, I'm using my UV resin directly out of the bottle and the tube to go ahead and apply it directly to the outside edges of those pieces of the shards. And it would immediately adhere them together. Attaching another piece here, but going ahead and having the UV light ready so that I can cure up and just get that to where it bonds and it doesn't pull or fall away from the main general flame-like shape. So the goal here is that they're going to kind of come out and then wisp up towards the top of the UV stained glass flame effect. Now, in essence, you could probably take these resin flame effects all the way to the very top and you could make them all attach at the very top of the flame. We are not going to do that in this video. We are going to kind of keep it open at the top and that way we can kind of work with it and add things later. I can always come back later and create some more of these little shards and then attach them at the very top to really make it like a bulb that the LEDs will sit into. I just didn't feel like we needed that in this particular video or this project at this time. Now just be aware that this is in real time, me attaching some of these. So some of them when you just kind of pre-fit them, decide how you want to do it, then kind of take it off, back up, and then just put it in with the UV resin here. See that little piece right there is sitting on its own volition. I'm not having to hold it into place because as you move up the flame, it gets easier and easier. Trying to figure out how I want to attach that there. And then there it is sitting on again on its own. And we're going to go ahead and let this drip down the outside edges of the flame. And then we're going to go ahead and cure that into position. Layering in a little bit of those blue pieces we had created. And we're also kind of filling in some of the gaps between the white larger pieces and some of the pieces we have attached so far. In all reality, we are going to go out of our way to block a lot of these little holes in later on in the process, and that's where it really starts to get very messy because I'm going to use a double gloved finger to hold the pressure on the inside of the bulb or flame effect as we apply UV resin to the outside and I cure it, and then I remove my finger and that layer of UV resin will remain But we'll get to more of that here shortly as we get to the messy portions of the project. Sometimes I just like to explain things before we roll into them, so you can have an expectation of what you might be running into as we go through later stages of the project. And you guys know I like to talk. Maybe not monologuing like a Batman villain, but I do like to talk about the project as we're working on it and give you as much information as I can as we work on things. That's one thing that I'd never want you to lack in my channel, is I don't want you to lack on just learning something new and then me just explaining what I'm doing. Although I do produce some projects where it's just music in the background, me never talking at all, I do want to give you some things where you really get a takeaway from the project. Even if it's not something that you may actually make on your own ever, it's still very cool to learn a new trade or learn a new skill. So we're going to go ahead and introduce a little bit of that pearl into this layer of UV resin. And now this is the layer that we're going to be kind of layering in on the outside of the stained glass effect here. Now the flame itself is looking pretty good overall, and it's not fully cured yet. Now originally I was going to try to hold it upside down and let this drip down the exterior edge of the flame and give it kind of like a dripped, like a sharp edge at the top. And it really just wasn't working out the way that I anticipated, because there's a lot of holes in it, because I just kind of layered these puzzle pieces together, and it just wasn't giving me the effect I wanted. So that's why I have to use my finger. So I will remove it from the base, and then we will try this a different way. So this is when I really start to realize, like, this is not working out. It's building up layers on the outside edges, but it's not filling in those holes. And I'm like, I got to do something different. All right, so here we are. I'm removing it from the actual topper base here. And what I'm doing, again, I'm using a double gloved left hand here, and I'm going to use my finger in an upward fashion to hold pressure to the UV resin as I apply it to these little holes and pockets in the outside jacket of the stained glass flame. Now, the best way that I can think about this is, imagine a pond, and we have water in the pond, and on top of the water we have a sheet of ice. Now my finger, as it were, is the water in the pond, applying upward pressure to the sheet of ice. Now the resin is the ice. So as the resin cures over the water, or my finger, and I remove my finger or the water, it creates a pocket or a void underneath that layer. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a shelling effect with the tip of my finger as that UV layer dries, and we're removing those holes and pockets. Now as I go through this, I'm going to use the rest of the UV resin in my little medicine cup here to kind of create a really strong bond or shell over the outside of the actual flame. So this is really not necessary, but it is creating a really strong bond. I'm going to get my Igloo 3D printer UV resin cure station out here, and it's basically a big canister tube with a bunch of really powerful UV lights. And it also has this turnstile table with a solar light on it, and it turns it when the solar lights hit it. So as we turn here, look how amazing that stained glass looks. Now don't get me wrong, the UV light really intensifies all of those inks that we applied, as well as colors in general. But look how cool that looks, you guys. Now just be aware, I might come back later on down the road and create another one of these with maybe glow pigments or something like that, and maybe just blue and orange, because that thing looks absolutely awesome. Now, if you want to see the full-length content, make sure you go over into the link here at the end of this video and do so. It is an hour long, but you get to see all the sculpting and actual paintwork on the diorama itself. I just thought the UV resin portion of this project deserved its own individual video, and here we are. Again, make sure you like and subscribe, guys, and I will catch you on the next awesome video, whether that be UV resin or another awesome project.